Hi everybody, I'm Nicole Vulcan, editor of the Source Weekly, and why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm State Representative Jack Zika. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Thanks for doing it at beautiful Hope Playground in Sam Johnson Park. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we like to just give you guys an opportunity to choose what a place that means something to you or has a view that you like, so we're glad to be here.
Appreciate it.
Why don't you tell everybody why you're running?
So I am your current state representative, and the way I got here was because of affordable housing. We had an extreme need for affordability in general here in Central Oregon, and I was on the Planning Commission, and I noticed a lot of the things that we were up against were land use laws and density requirements and just UGB expansion. There was a lot of red tape and a lot of things in the way to actually let a city grow, and there's a lot of policies that are in place that are Portland-centric, and they don't really take into account Redmond or Bend or even John Day or Medford for that matter. It's kind of like a one-size-fits-all. So that's how I got into it. And then being there, I've seen that there's more that needs to be done. I mean, we need daycare spots. In this position, you talk to a lot of people from a lot of different groups, and in their top 5 on all of them has been daycare. And that's personal to me too, because I have 2 small children. And we went through that. My wife didn't take a job because it was too expensive for daycare. So that has become a big issue. The rebuild now from the wildfires, that's going to be a top priority. I've already got a bill that I've put together and will introduce in the next session if I get reelected to help rebuild, because again, our land use laws would prohibit a lot of these families from rebuilding in wooded areas. So, and it's not only residential, it's commercial, industrial, roads, infrastructure. We heard Mill City, their water and sewer plant might have been destroyed in the fire, and they just received $10 million to upgrade that facility. Now we have to rebuild the whole facility, and going through that process, it might be very cumbersome, and it could go to the courts. So trying to pass legislation like that to make it easier for development and easier for families to replace their homes. We did work with veterans, and I was proud of a few bills that I've passed in there. So there's a lot of issues that came up while I was in session that I saw that needed attention. So that's why I wanted to run for re-election.
Thanks. Yeah, lots to tackle. Another thing that legislators and really everyone's tackling right now, and we're taking extra precautions around, is the coronavirus pandemic. Mm-hmm. So, what is your perspective on the legislature's handling of the coronavirus response, and what can they do as it continues on?
Okay. Well, there's a lot to unpack here. So, with the COVID response, I mean, 2020 has been a heck of a year, and Central Oregonians have really stepped up to helping neighbor. And I really see it in everyday life when we're wearing masks to protect each other. And you see it with the food bank, and you see it with the Red Cross, with people coming here from the wildfires, even that we're really stepping up. So Central Oregonians are really handling this in stride. The legislature has handled this appropriately. I don't feel some of it was right with blocking the public from some of the special sessions. I believe there should have been more public input involved with a lot of the legislation that was processed, because some of that was just, we need to get it done, it's an emergency, but still the public needed to be involved. The emergency board allocated money where it was necessary. They did take some missteps, in my opinion, because through the CARES Act money, they were supposed to go to county and cities to distribute, because they have a better knowing what the needs are in the community. And the state decided that it knew better and wanted to spend the money under the governor's authority. And so cities and counties were supposed to get about $500 million. So we ended up getting $200 million. And the city of Bend, I believe it was around $4 or $5 million that they got. And they used that money really well. They put it towards daycare and helping businesses stay open, and PPE, which all the businesses needed. But it could have been more. We could have had double that. And so I think they took a misstep with that part and the way that the funds were supposed to be handled. The PPE in the beginning was really hard to obtain. So we were in competition with large states like Texas. And so we had a hard time getting it at first. But then after we were able to kind of get our bearings set and all the cities combined together, we were able to get that purchasing power to buy it in bulk, and then companies started stepping up here locally in other states to make it and ship it in. So that was great. Another misstep, of course, was the employment department. That was devastating. That was, at one point in time, we had 70,000 people that were waiting for some sort of benefit check to come in. And if they had just lost their job, then that means they couldn't pay their house payment, they couldn't pay their electrical bills, they couldn't buy food. So it was a good thing that, you know, we stepped up with our food banks because we're providing food here locally. But I was working every day, and it was a priority, and we were getting hundreds of emails from people that were just in a waiting line. You know, it's been 7 weeks, it's been 12 weeks, you know, whatever it had been, and to get them to navigate the system. And we were eventually in the legislature to have enough, I don't know if it's coercion is the right word, but for the employment department to actually listen to us. And so we were able to form lists and have the whoever had emailed or contacted us, put them on that list, and then they had a person directly involved to take care of those cases, because a lot of them were difficult cases, people that weren't normally qualifying for unemployment checks. So you have your, you know, typically a realtor or a painter or somebody that is an independent contractor would typically not qualify. And with the pandemic unemployment assistance program, they did qualify. And so the software that the employment office wasn't capable of handling that. So it basically shut down. And there was money back in the past to update that software, which they never did. So I know it will be a priority in the next session to get that department up to par. And then they did a surge hire with everybody in there, and then their centers contracted COVID, so they had to shut them down. So I think there was lessons learned, and then also with all the new hires, they couldn't process the claims because they didn't have the training. So it was still only the senior analysts that were handling those claims. So all the new hires were just answering phones and putting people on hold, which was extremely frustrating. So there are some things that we need to improve on, and by far, I think the employment department is one, and then access to PPE is another one.
So, moving to talk about the economy and the legislature's ability to support economic recovery, what, in your perspective, can the legislature do to mitigate some of that damage?
For economic recovery?
The economic
right.
impacts that we're seeing.
Okay. Well, I think that goes into part of how the money, the funds, the CARES Act funds were distributed. And the way they were lined out, we should have gotten quite a bit more. And it should have gone to cities and counties, because cities and counties know the needs of the community a lot better than the state does. And so I think that was a big misstep on the part of the governor, the way that the funds were handled. Business Oregon had grants. The Bend Chamber stepped up and had a lot of funds that they did to help out businesses that weren't able to get the PPP loan, the Paycheck Protection Program, because they were small businesses. You know, if you only had two employees, like our poor businesses in downtown, we had one that closed because it was just a father and son, and they didn't qualify for PPP. And we tried to get them lined up with the chamber or somebody else. Somebody, please help this business, and it just wasn't in time. So that was unfortunate that we lost that business. So I think having those programs, and if we do go through this again and there's another stimulus, having those funds come directly to the communities would be a lot more beneficial.
Thanks. So another calamity, Oregon is just continuing to experience these massive fires that are, you know, now a little bit less acute for most people. What's your stance on how to manage wildfire risk in the state at the legislative level, and what specific actions are you working on or would you propose?
Yeah. So in the 2019 session, I passed a bill. It's a really easy number. It's 2222. And what that did was, with the help of my predecessor who started it, it's the Wildland Urban Interface. And so back at the time, it was Paradise, California. And we went, we don't want a Paradise, California. So what do? We have to clean up the ladder fuels. And ladder fuels are the brush and the pine needles, and so that catches fire. And normally a tree won't catch if the fire is small enough, but they have the dead limbs, and then the fire crawls up it, and that's what the ladder fuels are called. And then it goes into a crown fire, and then that's when we get the massive fires, when the fires go onto the top. So with this bill, it helps the ODF contact the property owners around this urban wildland interface to help them clean up their property, have the defensible space, suggest building codes with flame-resistant materials, and just so they're aware. And that bill hopefully will get more attention, hopefully more funding in the next session to get, so ODF has the resources available to go talk to the property owners to protect our city limits for our people. Because, I mean, we have Aubrey could be in danger. We have sisters could be in danger, so there's a lot of things that could be at stake that people should be aware of how to protect their property. And again, neighbor helping neighbor by protecting their neighbor by cleaning up their own property. We now are aware with the rebuild. So I just spoke about that. So I'll have a bill in this session to try to help that with the rebuild. And we need to make sure that we're cleaning up the forest management. There are practices that could put loggers back to work, and that those funds, just by taking a few trees and cleaning up the forest, could pay for that, because you can use those trimmings for a biomass plant like we have in Lapine, but they've had frustrations that they can't take from federal land because they don't get the tax credit like they do from the state land. So we really need to partner up with our federal delegation to make sure that they can have that tax credit come from cleaning the forest around them, because they're actually situated right next to federal forest land, but they can't do anything about it. So there's a lot of things that we can do to try to help the forests.
So inevitably, when people talk about the wildfires, the conversation eventually shifts to climate change. I think most Oregonians are aware of what happened during the last regular session and the one before that too, in regards to the Republican walkout in response to the climate change legislation.
Sure.
What's your take on hoping to prevent another Republican walkout if something like that is introduced again?
Sure. So that bill was a product of a supermajority in the House. So if they have a supermajority in the House and in the Senate, which means they can pass legislation without any Republican input, even up to a tax. They have that many. And they didn't take any of our input. I had an amendment to put it to a vote to the people, and they totally rejected it, didn't even want to have the conversation. They put in an extra member from the Senate to pass it out of committee because it was going to fail in committee. And if the president of the Senate hadn't stepped in to vote on it, it would have been dead right there. And so they changed the rules, they brought that in. It was 10-1 emails that I was receiving against it, and written testimony in opposition, it was 5-1. And over 30 counties came out and said that this was a bad bill. So the Democrat leadership was not listening to us, didn't care about any of that. So you basically took the voices of 2 million Oregonians out of the equation, and that was the only option. We couldn't do anything about it, so we had to walk out. And they knew, based on the schedule, that we were going to do that. So they put it up sooner, rather than we told them, do this at the end. Let's pass all the bills. Let's get everything taken care of in the session. Do this at the end, and we'll come to a head at that. And that's when we can come to our impasse. They weren't interested. They controlled the schedule. They moved the bill up sooner. So we had to walk out. And that was the only way we could get our voices heard, and the only way we could make Oregonians aware of what was going on.
So many follow-ups going through my mind, but I guess the one that's most salient for voters is, what do you say to the voters who say that makes you someone who doesn't believe in climate change?
Oh, I believe in climate change. I would ask them to look at my voting record. I voted for solar panel subsidies, and that passed. I voted to ban fracking here in Oregon, and that passed. I voted to ban oil drilling on our offshores, and that passed. So, there's another bill that was to plan larger solar farms and wind farms to make it easier. So it went through the county instead of a federal issue, and we passed it. And I was a part of all of that. So I believe in climate change, and I believe that there's good policies to be had. And there was bipartisan. I was one of only a few Republicans that voted on the fracking and the oil drilling. So I'm there, and I'm very concerned about our environment. But when it was that type of life-changing legislation that could really impact, we talk about affordability and how expensive it is here in Central Oregon. That cap and trade bill would have increased your gasoline prices by $3, up to $3 per gallon, doubled your natural gas, your heating payment. Everything's brought in by trucks, and farmers still use diesel gas. That would have increased all of their costs. Our food would have went up. So it's going to impact us pretty heavily, and so that's why I voted no on the cap and trade. But absolutely, I have voted. If you look at my record, I voted constantly for the environment, except for that.
Thank you. What proposals would you support to reduce emissions in the state, if not the sweeping legislation that we've seen in recent sessions?
Right. Well, there's a few things you can do. Higher fuel standards, which is higher octane, but that's, can increase your prices. We have electric cars, and we've made that a priority of saying we need more charging stations in central and eastern Oregon, because there's not. You can't go from Salem to Ontario on one charge. You have to stop. And then, so there's one in Detroit, but I don't know if it's still there anymore,
Yeah.
So, and you could maybe in Bend, of course you can in Bend, but after that, it's pretty dry. So we want more charging stations. That would help, so it incentivize electric cars. When I was on the Energy and Environment Committee, there's a product called hydrogen fuel cell, which is amazing because its byproduct is water. And so there's other options available. We just need to incentivize and bring it here to Oregon so consumers have that option of what car they want to buy, what kind of transportation they want. Of course, making it easier, but that's more of a city thing for bikes and buses. But, having those policies in place and encouraging cities to do that.
Thanks. So, I think there's another one farther down. Yes, here we go. I put it out of order. What's your opinion about the out-of-state corporate timber industry in Oregon? And what would you do to make them more accountable to Oregon communities and to the state as a whole?
How do you mean more accountable?
Well, so there's been a lot of conversation around some of the influence, the timber unity influence is actually not Oregonians' influence, that some of those big corporations don't actually benefit the small Oregon timber communities that they purport to support.
So that is a product of how policies have run for the last 30 years. A lot of the small guys had to close because they couldn't afford it and they couldn't do the proper work. So you have bigger companies, and some of them are out of state, and they own a lot of land, and now it's become private land that they can harvest the timber from. So that is something that it was an unintended consequence of policy that's happened. And how we do that is by making it more readily available. When we talk about thinning the forest so we can try to tame down these fires, we'll see more of these little guys pop back up. And I think that's how we hold them accountable, is more competition. Now, the Timber Unity Rally was something like I've never seen. So many Oregonians came together, from truckers, farmers. It wasn't just timber. It was, we had so many people there that were protesting and circling the Capitol and driving their trucks and out there rallying, that it was something to see. I think it's one of the biggest rallies that's ever happened. So
interesting.
Yeah.
So a series of bills, you guys passed a series of bills in one of the last sessions in response to police brutality protests. Yeah. Do you feel the state's done enough to address police accountability, or should it do more?
We can always do better. I mean, I don't think anybody in any industry has ever said, oh, we're perfect, so we can always do better. And right after Mr. Floyd's death, I went to the Redmond police officer, or the Redmond PD, and asked for a ride-along so I could find out what we're doing here locally. And they showed me that there's body cams, but there's not all police departments have body cams. And I think that would be great that if we could provide those. So no defunding the police. We need those funds to protect people so we can have more training and have more protective measures like the body cams. We did pass, I think it was 5 or 6 police brutality bills. But what really it did was the police officers work with case law. They don't work on statutory law, but they want the most current law. So what we did is we brought all of our statutory laws up to case law. So we have some really great police forces here in Bend and Redmond and Sun River that were very conscious of what was going on, and they wanted to help however they could. And I was in communication during those processes. I had talked to our sheriff, I talked to Sun River, Bend, and Redmond to find out, are these bills, it's going to hurt you? And some of them, the way they were drafted originally, would have hurt the way they can do their police force work. They don't practice choke holds here. They don't even teach them here in Oregon. Mm-hmm. But they use it as a measure in case something drastic happens. It's considered a lethal use of force, just like drawing their gun. So if something happened at John Tuck Elementary and somebody went in there with a weapon and a police officer followed him in and used a chokehold to disarm him, I would consider that a hero. But the way the law was originally written, it would have made him a criminal. Mm-hmm. And so we were able to adjust it, and we had 2 ex-chiefs of police on the group to help bring them and modify the law to make sure that everything was all right. And the use of pepper spray, that's a tactic they use so they don't have to use their weapon. And one of the bills was to ban pepper spray. And I talked to our chief in Redmond. He said, if there's a hostage situation, I need to fire a canister of tear gas in there. And if that's banned, I can't do that. My officers have to go in there with their guns live, by ammunition. So these are tactics that I don't think everybody thought about. It was a knee-jerk movement. And so, but yes, we can do better. And during the ride along, I met a police officer, and he told me that they have wellness checks, that they have 5 wellness checks included in their health care plan. And some of the officers don't go to those wellness checks because they fear ridicule, and they fear that they won't get a promotion because they use their wellness checks. And these police officers see some of the most brutal things, from murders, DUI crashes, domestic violence. If you think in Portland, all the riots with the fire and people throwing stuff and just hate, and that they take that home. They take all those experiences home. And so I've crafted a bill in the next session that at least one of them is mandatory. So they can go talk that out and get out that feeling of what's happened. So hopefully that'll make them feel better and make them a better police officer by being able to express themselves and not fear that they're going to lose a promotion or lose, or get ridiculed by their fellow officers. Yeah.
So baked into the conversation around what we've kind of evolved into, instead of defund the police, let's reallocate some of those resources. There's been a conversation about mental illness and just how that plays into law enforcement. Yeah. Meanwhile, Oregon ranks worst in the nation for the high prevalence of mental illness and low access to care, and has one of the highest rates of addiction nationwide. What can an Oregon representative do to reverse those trends?
So what we did in the 2019 session, I was proud to be a co-sponsor of this bill, was we allocated up to $100,000 to open wellness centers. So like the sheriff, Deschutes counties, they did that in Bend, and they were able to take that money and help them open that. We could have more programs like that. We have a great...
Are you referring to the Stabilization Center?
Yes,
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, the Stabilization Center. They used the grant to help open that and the initial costs. So as a state, we can provide those type of grants. We also have, if we're talking about more of our homeless population and with their mental health issues or maybe substance abuse issues, you have a great program in the Central Oregon Veterans Outreach, COVO, and they do wraparound services. They go find the veterans that are homeless. Maybe it's in the BLM land. And they'll go there, bring a shower truck, bring a hot meal, and then get them cleaned up and say, hey, why don't you do this temporary housing? They get them into temporary housing. They bring in a social worker, somebody to tell them about all the benefits and programs that are available to actually lift them up and get them into stable housing and then a job and back into society. We need more programs like that. We need more wraparound services. We have a lot. If you go into the legislature and being on the Human Services Committee, I saw there are a lot of duplicate services programs, a lot of things that do the same thing. We need to start combining them and combining the effort to provide wraparound services. And I think that's a heavy lift because there's a lot of institutionalized programs that have been there a long time that we need to get them to work together. But that's something that I'm committed to try to do.
Thank you. You mentioned affordable housing early on. Do you want to talk about any current or future plans you have around affordable housing? And you're welcome to talk about, past efforts as well.
Sure. So I was very fortunate in passing, for Central Oregon, the Skyline Village here in Redmond, and it's a pilot program. And there's one in Bend, it's with private land, and in Redmond it was public land. And the mayor of Redmond and I went around to our commissioners and showed them the value in giving the land to the city of Redmond so we could provide affordable housing. And so it'll be about 500 units. 50% of them are going to be 80% of AMI for, I think it's 40 or 50 years. So it's going to be truly affordable housing for a long time. And since they gifted the land, they took that biggest cost piece out of the equation. So if you have $100,000 per lot, you take that away, that's huge. So there's going to be a lot of families that benefit from the development of that, and they're in the process of annexing that land into the city now. So I think development starts next year on that. So that's going to be huge. And I tried in the short session, it didn't work, but because they wanted to change it into a study. But I'm going to try again in the next session if I'm lucky enough to get reelected, as bringing that pilot project statewide so other cities can enjoy that. And what it is just adding 50 acres to the UGB if you have a situation where you're fortunate enough to be able to get gifted the land or get the land really cheap. And I think all cities should be able to enjoy that. You know, if you have the opportunity as a city to bring in true affordable housing, you got to take it, you know, before that opportunity goes away. Pendleton has also showed interest in trying to get included into the pilot project. So I think we have a real want for that in the state. And everybody needs affordable housing. We need it here in Central Oregon, but it's everywhere. You know, we're growing so fast that it's a little bit more intense here. And I would like to be able to say that cities can reuse that again if something else comes up. So Bend and Redmond would be able to partake in it another time. Yeah. Oh, and we also have ADUs. ADUs, you can do an ADU, which is an additional dwelling unit. You know, if you wanted to have your family member or rent it out. In the city of Bend, in the city of Redmond, you can do that. It's no problem. You know, it's a permit cost. But in the rural areas like Tumalo, you can't do it. I don't see where that's fair. So we're going to be introducing a bill to say that you can do that anywhere. Is bring in an ADU. So yeah, I think that would add some rentals. It's not going to be the silver bullet, but it'll do some. Yeah.
So another proposal out there to raise some funds and kind of tackle a hole in some people's minds is the introduction of a state real estate sales tax or property tax on homes worth more than $500,000 to support affordable housing. Where do you stand on that?
I haven't heard about that one. I mean, it seems like I would want it to be higher because the median house price here in Central Oregon is about $500,000. So you're getting to people when they're just could be first-time home buyers. So I don't think that would help the situation at all for affordability. Maybe when you get up into the $1 million, $2 million houses, that would be something that I would be interested in looking at. Yeah.
Thanks. So I wanted to talk just briefly about cannabis. I think one of the areas that there might be an opportunity for, just an opportunity is eventual interstate commerce in the cannabis industry. What's your take on just preparing Oregon for that eventual future?
Yeah. Well, we're one of the few states that have approved that from the voters, of course, approved that. And it's a step that it's being started. I know there was a couple pieces of legislation that were passed to say that it would be okay to drive it across state lines. So I think we're in the process of doing that. But if it did become nationally legal, then we would be a couple steps ahead of every other state. So it's good thinking ahead, I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
We're getting close to the end. I want to talk a little bit about gun laws in Oregon. Do you support strengthening gun laws in Oregon? And if so, what types of things would you support?
I mean, it all depends on what the law is. A lot of times when they'll bring up a policy in Salem, it overreaches, where they say you can only buy so many pieces of ammunition, you can only have a gun if it has 4 or 5 bullets, and there's not many guns that have that many, There's been pieces that says a 16-year-old can't fire a gun, but father and son or families go out and they go hunting, so they would be breaking the law. So you have to be really pragmatic about how you think about what that piece of gun legislation would be. The FBI checks, I think those are great. We saw during the pandemic there was so many people that were purchasing firearms for whatever reason to protect their home if things went sideways. People were getting scared. So, and that program through the Oregon State Police was backed up 5,000 deep, and they were having a tough time getting the approvals out. So it was taking weeks, sometimes months. So I think an updated that system, maybe a more updated background check would be prudent. But as far as restricting gun ownership, I don't think I would be interested in that.
Okay.
Now, I do think that we should make schools safer by having electronic doors. I think there's measures that we can take to protect, and I think if people have a mental health illness, they passed a piece of legislation with that's something that needs to be looked into. Absolutely.
Great. So is there anything we haven't discussed today that you'd like to talk about?
Oh my. I think we talked about some of the bills that were my priorities within the questions. It has been an honor to be the state representative for House District 53, and I hope that the people think that I did a great job. And if they did, I would be honored to go back to Salem and represent them again, and hopefully bring back more. A couple of things I didn't bring up is we brought back money for COCC to expand their campus, brought back money for water conservation through the irrigation district to be piped, brought back money for the High Desert Museum to have some of our culture and expand that here in Central Oregon. So there was some really big wins. They told me when I walked in that you're a freshman, you're walking into the super minority, you're not going to get anything done. And I was able to pass quite a few pieces of legislation, including the POW signs that you see now on 126 when you're driving down there. That was a piece of legislation that I passed with Representative help. So we did a lot of good things, and I think that was a testament to how I'm able to reach across the aisle. I'm not unwilling to work with my colleagues across the aisle. And in fact, I enjoyed it, and we got a lot of things done. So I hope I get to go back, and I hope I get elected again.
Thank you so much for being here with us and for taking part in the democratic process and for your service so far.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks.